We're going.
Yeah. Excellent.
Good. Okay. All right. Well, I'm slowly coming in here. Hi, everybody. I have no idea if you can hear me. Oh, good. I got a hi. It looks like my video may or may not be popping up, and I'm not quite sure why. Because of that. That is why. I just fixed the problem. Hi, everybody. I am Kate Brodock. I'm so glad you are here with us today. We're going to get started on the second series of our excellent time that we have with Alana Karen. For those of you who don't know me, I'm CEO of Women 2.0. We are hosting Alana in this great series. Alana is also a longtime friend of Women 2.0 and one of our absolutely best contributors. And on that note, part of the reason she is here is because she recently has come out with a great new book called Adventures of Women in Tech, which is the theme of this series, where she's going to go through some of what she's talked about in the book. After this series, we'll be having 5 additional, thanks, Christina. We'll be having 5 additional talks, so hope you can join us for that. I'm going to kick it over to Alana for the majority of the session, but today's discussion, we will be chatting with Amy, who we'll hear from in a little bit more about her background, and diving into the excellent topic of marketing ourselves as we're advancing in our career, and finding and also the difficult task of accepting support while we're doing all of that. So without further ado, I am going to pass it over to Alana and Amy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to our second fireside chat that we are having based on my book, The Adventures of Women in Tech, How We Got Here and Why We Stay. I wrote the book to share stories from over 80 women navigating their careers in tech, a diverse assortment of women from different backgrounds, different fields, different ambitions, all building and navigating their careers in tech, with the goal of both increasing belonging and inclusion that we feel, but also hopefully providing tools that can benefit us all in our journeys. And so I'm so grateful to Women 2.0 to give me another venue for sharing this message and bringing in both women that I interviewed and a couple newbies, I think, along the way, to share their stories in more detail than I was able to always put in the book, although Amy has some of my favorite parts of the book. So yes, I'm going to introduce you to the amazing Amy, and we are going to discuss some of the questions that I asked in the book, but also some new ones, and explore many themes of the book. Today, 2 of the themes from your book, Marketing 101, or marketing ourselves, marketing yourself, and finding support are kind of the 2 key ones we'll cover, but we'll touch on other things along the way too. So a brief introduction to Amy, where she can always add on if I missed anything. First of all, fun fact, which is semi-embarrassing, but also I feel like the most important thing to know about us is that we met when we were in high school at what I fondly call nerd camp, when we spent the summer together, our summer as 17-year-olds, learning about the Renaissance. So we went to history camp when we were in high school, and we are forever better for it. So
an interdisciplinary exploration on a theme. So not just history, right? But it happened to be wrapped around the Renaissance.
Oh, that's much better than I've ever branded it. Thank you. See, you are why we have marketing on the agenda today. Okay, you are currently a director of on-site technical support at Marsh & McLennan Companies. And I said director so fancy because you were recently promoted. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Leading 40 plus technology professionals, supporting 5,800 plus colleagues in 90 plus locations in 4 countries. So quite a big dictate there. You have over 20 years of experience in commercial and government organizations across financial, health, education, and information technology industries. You also serve as a diversity and inclusion champion with the goal of creating culture where everyone's potential can be unleashed. I love that you said that. At MMC, you're the facilitator for the Technology Advisory Council on Race and Diversity. I'm reading this so I don't get anything wrong. A representative on the MGTI Diversity Council, former global lead of the Buddy Program, mental health champion, and former global lead of the Buddy. Wait, I'm rereading this. Lean In Circles.
Lean In ambassador.
Former global ambassador for Lean In Circles. And you're actively involved in DI initiatives at every organization you've worked at throughout your career.
Yeah.
Okay. And you also founded a Lean In Circle in 2013 in Washington, D.C. that has over 182 members. And my son has just walked in.
We had an amazing event recently.
Go do some homework. Love you.
On personal finance.
I know.
So we cover all kinds of issues, and our next meeting in May is going to be on the importance of mentoring. So it's important for us as women to have strong support networks, both in our careers and bring those networks together.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for adding that in. My son, I've locked myself in a room. My son still found me and asked whether he could play games this morning. And I lovingly said no. He's behind on homework. He needs to get at it. Okay. And then there's a little bit more. Ooh, this is good. Because you have been a mentor for Wellesley, where you went to university in the Washington program since 2009. You're an alumni interviewer, and you're a frequent speaker at events for United Way Worldwide to the University of Maryland. You were elected to the Wellesley College Alumni Association Board of Directors in 2020. You have an MBA in finance from New York University, Leonard N. Stern School of Business, and BA in Chinese Studies and Economics from Wellesley College.
Yeah,
Very
so
nice.
Not your traditional technologist for sure.
Well, thank you for joining me. You know what? I will say that having interviewed a ton of women or talked with a ton of women, I don't know there is a traditional background necessarily. So many people made their way here through different paths. And that's why I love sharing all of these stories, because I think there's people just like you telling themselves they're like not a leader in tech or they're not a woman in tech, but you are.
Yeah. And it's really important because even as we're looking at our job descriptions, is a degree in computer science important for this role? And are we limiting ourselves to candidates by requiring that?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's kind of the drum I'm beating right now. Oh, well, see, right off the bat, we could get off. Let's see. But first, I want to make sure, did I miss any important highlights in your career story? Just kind of, going off your resume.
Right. So I think at the end of the day, all of these pieces come together, right? So when we talk about the different paths in our lives, like my sister was very linear. She wanted to be a doctor. She went to medical school. She became a doctor, and she's a doctor now, right? I started in insurance, a Prudential's leadership development plan. I have a property and casualty and life and health license, right? Went into finance, went into federal government consulting, and wrapped it all back around in my role at Marsh McLennan. So pick up all those pieces along the way because you will use them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I often have to explain my career to people because I've been at different parts of my company, and you're the one following your through line. You're the one bringing those things together. All right. So I'm starting off each show with some questions that I asked women in my book. When you and I met, it was the summer before our senior year of high school. And I'm curious, what did you want to be when you grew up at that point?
I have drawings of when I was a kid, and my sister and I drew pictures a lot as kids. I have pictures of being a teacher, and I have pictures of being a fashion designer. I had a whole line of clothes. I have lots of pictures of clothes that I would make. And I think that what comes across is like, one, I'm a big sister to a family of, I have 3 other siblings. We always played school. So I was always in this kind of leadership, leading, teaching role, modeling role. And this sort of fashion thing is about image, is about, how do we put our best foot forward? What is the right look, feeling, energy that we want to bring, right? So I think those things sort of do come together and show up every now and then. Not in my shoe collection at all.
Oh, I was just messing. I was just messing with the functionality here. Anyway, I got distracted. Yeah, no, I think that they come together, and I see echoes of them when I talk with women. Like that thing about wanting to be a teacher. You'll see it in all your mentorship, right? Like there's always this like. I think there are certain seeds. It's not always like they were completely lost as people went along. They just morphed, I think, as they sort of hit adulthood and saw all the opportunities and life took them places. Now, if you wanted to be like an actress, and, maybe you lost it along the way. I wanted to be an actress when I was a kid, and I think it's really set me up well for all of the presentations and things like
All the
this.
Zoom meetings,
All
right?
the Zoom.
I'm a karaoke queen. I love this stuff. I'm into it. Put a mic in my hand. I'm into it.
You're ready for it? Yep, exactly. By the way, if you're shaking, it's because my dog is trying to get settled next to this computer. Good times in my house. So another one, kind of getting more into challenges in your career. What's a key challenge you faced in your career?
So I think, those of us who've been in the financial industry, there are a lot of layoffs all the time. It's sort of part and parcel, and even in professional services, right? And I got laid off twice. I was laid off at Prudential and again at JP Morgan. And, looking back on it, it's a form of grief because I love the companies I work for. I love the organizations I work for. I pour my heart into it, and I'm proud to be a colleague there. But then, there's a severance package, and you're no longer needed, and off you go into the world, and you always find something better. The severance package was amazing. I had a great year off. But I think what that really taught me, and my father's layoff as well, which he took really hard, that if there's attachment to where you work, what if you took that attachment, that branding, that value that you gave to your organization and put it on yourself? And you are the brand, you are the value, you promote yourself, you're proud of yourself. There are times that you can represent your company. There's jokes that I'm the face of MMC because for a while I was plastered all over the corporate page and in the career section. So you can represent your firm, but I think, let's take that value and own it ourselves and grow ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I love that idea. I've often questioned, like, am I putting too much of my time, my effort, my energy, if it's keeping me up at night, that kind of, am I putting too much of myself in my company? And it is interesting to think about, what if you took even some of that and focused it back on you? But also very true, and some may be going through this right now, that there is a very real emotional impact to whether it's layoffs or your company going under, or whatever it is, and having to journey through that. I'm curious, as you went through those, how did you find your way back to yourself? What did you found helped you as you were sort of going through that, like, detachment from some other entity and deciding what to do next for yourself?
Sure. My layoff at Prudential. So I got my MBA part-time. So layoffs were kind of a good thing because I didn't have to pay my tuition reimbursement back. Um, the other part of it is that a recruiter contacted me very quickly at Prudential and brought me over to Lehman Brothers. The harder layoff was from JP Morgan because that was also 2008, and we were experiencing a very severe economic crisis at the time. And at that point, I was like, New York is not the place to be. Finance is not going to be the place for me. So I had to pivot and I was dating someone in DC, moved to DC. I figured DC had a stronger, more stable economy because of government and taxpayer money and kind of how DC functions differently from New York City, and completely pivot, right? So I was project managing hedge funds and funds of hedge funds, and then pivot that into federal IT project management. And that took, learning a whole new set of language and really learning a different way of talking about myself and presenting myself to people. And friends along the way, right? So I got after JP Morgan forward, right? These are all opportunities from people I know. And that's why it's so critical. I think going forward, your job is going to come from someone who's worked with you, someone who you know. So it's so important to maintain those relationships and present a very positive image about who you are.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, because I do think that sometimes people have trouble even taking kind of like what their experience has been and doing that reframing. And that is a form of marketing yourself, right? How did you convince folks to take the leap on you from finance to tech? Was there like, look, because I did project management here, I can do XYZ. Like, is that kind of the story you told? How did that sound?
Right. So we are all building our toolbox, and we can apply them in different industries, and we can apply them in different roles, right? So I was a project manager at JP Morgan's fund of hedge funds, bringing groups together to form and deliver on multi-million dollar hedge funds in multiple currencies, blah, 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 right? I can take that. I'm great with people. I'm great with translating language. I'm great with requirements and process flow and all of kind of those key skills. See me in this role, right? I can do this. I just need to learn, it's a scrum team versus the legal team, right? It's a different way of doing things that I'm really good at. Um, so take that chance on me. And I did take a pay cut for that.
Yeah. 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 There's been a couple times where I did that. You go back to go forward if you're taking those leaps. Interesting. Okay.
A little tango, career tango.
Yeah. I mean, I do think we think, I do think that we tend to think of, the American success story anyway is up and to the right, right? Or I don't know how this is showing to all of you. And so I do think sometimes we have to resist that, right? Like we have to like, no. Like, what do I want? What do I want to do now? I think related to that, when we were prepping for this talk, you mentioned that you were reflecting on how your early career in marketing has influenced your career. And so I'm curious, I don't know, maybe this was a big leap to think like that the overall story of marketing has helped you think about your career, but I'm curious, like what have been those things where you're able to draw from that past experience that have benefited you?
So the marketing piece is essential and very formidable for me because it shows that you have a voice, right? So I used my voice on behalf of alternative markets. I was writing investor communications. You have a point of view. You're trying to also assess what your reader is thinking of, right? And how do you influence a reader thousands of miles away? What is it that they want out of what you're writing? So it taught me a bunch of things. Like one, words are critical and important. And I think, being a strong writer is really important. Being a strong presenter, being a strong speaker, all of those things, communication is key because we're sort of in a world and environment around relationships, right? I don't make anything. I don't build anything. I'm not selling anything, right? But my work is done based on relationships and how well I'm able to influence people in my life. And then the other piece around it is like there's a style and there's sort of how you want things to look and how you want things presented. And I always think about my favorite class in business school, which was negotiation, right? I'm always aligning interests. What does my reader want? What does the client want? what is my interest in this? How can we come together? How can we work together, right? I won the Best Pie Expander Award in negotiations class, and that really is like, how do we get to win-win? How do we get to yes?
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Um, okay. I got to keep us going. Otherwise, we'll never get to all of these good things I wanted to ask you. So, one of the things that I remember, and it's already come out in your bio a bit, is how influential your alma mater, Wesley, has been in your journey. um, so,
Sorry.
I was curious, can you talk more about that? Because I think that um, either some of us overlook maybe our university experience as a source of support, or similarly, we could use advice about how to tap it. I feel like you've done an awesome job both getting and giving.
I think the university, our experience, right, is an amazing opportunity to kind of get back into a cohort. We had an opportunity going to a women's college of 4 years of kind of a unicorn world, right? Where all of the leaders were strong, amazing women, female identified or non binary, right? All of the events, everything was planned. We didn't have to deal with the misogyny of kind of the everyday. It was a very unicorn, amazing, unique experience. And that set the norm. The norm is that the women are in charge. The norm is that our voices are heard. The norm is that there's no mansplaining and we don't have to apologize or explain why we are at the table. And so having that very formidable, that is the norm for us when we leave and then kind of get back into the real world. To be honest with you, I had a really difficult time at Wellesley. I had a lot of self-esteem and doubt issues, and I think I missed an opportunity. I also didn't go to reunion for the first 15 years because I had this sense that I had to make it. I had to be good enough. I had to come back to reunion with this story of like doing great things. What I didn't know is that we reunion on nines and fives, and I'm class of 99. Madeleine Albright's class of 59, Hillary Clinton is class of 69. And had I gone earlier, I could have hung out with them at reunion. So my bad on that. But I found that coming back into kind of the Wellesley bubble after that time away, it's full support and full support by incredible siblings all around the world. It's been an amazing feeling back to me. And I wanted to give that as often as I can to the current students. I'm really active in a program called Wellesley in Washington, where we get 20 students that intern in Washington, D.C. every year. And I learn so much from them. I get a lot of energy from them. Interviewing candidates, sometimes we like read the news and we're like, oh, everything's over, right? The world is over. And then you hang out with these amazing young people who are going to change the world. And you're like, we're going to be okay. They're amazing. The children are amazing. We're going to be okay. So they are as much a form of inspiration to me as, whatever I can do to give back to them, open my networks, introduce them to people, introduce people to each other, right? We have one of the strongest networks in the world, and it's really an extraordinary experience to be a part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love you admitting, so because I feel like that's so common that we kind of lock ourselves off from opportunity and even just joy because we have these built-in insecurities or expectations, and I definitely see it across genders. But I do think that there's a certain amount of that that I even see in the workplace. Um, Now that you know that, like, do you actively catch people in the workplace or in your life and be like, no, 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 don't do that pattern of thinking? Like, how do you help others kind of get out of that?
Absolutely. I just finished. We just taped a video to show current students about how to join the alumni network and how to participate. And really, at the end of the day, just reach out. If they don't write you, that's no big deal because you're back to where you started. And if you do, you are unlocking doors, unbelievable doors that you've never known existed. There is somebody all around the world ready to help you. And that's an amazing opportunity. It's an amazing feeling to have, right? When we have these panels for the students, they're like, you seem so confident, because every day I walk with thousands of my siblings, and I know that if I need anything, right, we are here for each other. Alana, you're here for me, I'm here for you, right? That's an incredible sense to know that we have these incredible networks that we can activate anytime. So those are really important. And then how does it show up? I tell people to go to reunion. I tell people to reach back out to the networks. I tell people to give, because that's also a feeling of value. When you start giving back, you tend to kind of step out of your insecurities because you're doing something great. And then there's also the sense that, I'm a lesbian. I'm in a same gender partnership, and I had a mentee reach out to me recently, and they were like, I'm transitioning right now. So, I'm going to be cut off from a lot of opportunities. And as a mentor, I get to say that now is the time, right? There is a war on talent. Companies are trying to diversify their organizations. Now is the time to be proud of who you are and say, I am a trans person. I'm a person of color, right? I'm an international person. Like, these are things that companies are looking for, and to sell yourself. And you know what? If that turns them off, you don't want to work there anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, I love this. It's so key. I found that women who I talked to who'd found support through their career were just so much more confident. They were so much more confident in their decisions along the way, and where they'd ended up, because all along the way they'd had that board. They had people to bounce ideas off. They've had someone to gut check them if they were telling a bad story in their head. Whatever it was, they had that along the way, versus kind of being alone in their heads, which maybe you were for the first 15 years. So I think it is really valuable advice. And I just want to share a quotation that you gave that's in the book that I've loved. I've like put it up on marketing materials. There are people willing to help and support one another. And if you don't have that, build it up for yourself. Next step, find it for other people. I just love that.
Thanks. And that's one of the reasons I started Lean In. Sheryl Sandberg's book came out. People in my circle were like, we should have a Lean In circle. And I said, sure, let's do this, right? Because I love organizing events. I love bringing together. I am a heavy, heavy user of Facebook and LinkedIn. And so it was very easy for me to bring people together to set up standing meetings. We've been going strong for 8 years. We have 180 people. We had a really, we had 18 people show up last month on personal fire chance that they go into poverty, and we just can't have that, right? So I pull together this Lean In circle, and we meet. And so those of you in DC, join us, or in the DC metro area, join us, because we are a group that comes together and shares and supports each other. And then I was able to launch that at Marsh McLennan as the global head of, as the global ambassador for Lean In. And we are in 6 regions with 13 circles around the world, creating these support groups for colleagues all over the world.
Yeah. Okay.
There is a question. Storytelling is key to marketing yourself well. Do you discuss storytelling in your book? Alana, maybe this is for you. What is another foundational book on the art of storytelling that you might recommend?
I don't dig into it. It's not a book about, like, it's a book about storytelling, in that I tell 80 plus women's stories, and I emphasize why storytelling is important, and why we are so impacted by stories. But I think you're thinking about sort of like, how do you tell the narrative of your career potentially more? How do you put together a good narrative like that? And I may, off the top of my head, because I recommend various books in my book, but there isn't one specifically focused on storytelling. Do you have one, Amy, that you recommend to people when they ask you this?
I don't, and I think it, one, can evolve over time, right? And two, think to like your core self and poke around. What are other people is telling about their message? You need kind of a short piece, and this kind of comes back to marketing a little bit. Make a press kit for yourself. You sort of need, your short one-liner, which is kind of your LinkedIn line. You need a summary, you need a bio, you need a really great headshot, right? So that when you have opportunities like an ability, opportunity to speak at Women 2.0 or with Alana, in seconds, you can be like, here's my bio, here's my headshot, let's go, right? So I don't know storytelling per se, but have a press kit ready. And I changed my story, right? So a story, I changed it kind of based on who I'm talking to and sort of what, we're trying to align on.
I'd love to pop in because I almost want to answer for Alana too, because Alana, I mentioned that she's written for Women 2.0 before. Please go read this series that she did, because what Alana did is she actually took, she's at Google, they have formal review processes. So she's got years of actual formal data. Although, as Amy alluded to, this is something you can also do informally. And you can read, Alana, you can read yourself going through and understanding more about yourself, more about your leadership qualities, doing a feedback loop every single time that review came in. And I thought that was a really, really strong, you obviously gave us the benefit of writing it down, but it was a really strong process that you walked through. And then again, that's something that you can do informally too. One of the things that I love suggesting to people from a coaching standpoint is to go out and ask others just what your great qualities are. Don't ask what your weaknesses are. We are not used to doing that. Ask your parents, ask your family, ask your friends, and get that group of characteristics about yourself that do positively tell your story. So anyways, I wanted to throw that in because I immediately thought of Alana's excellent series that she wrote for us.
Oh, thank you. And while you were doing that, I looked on my website. I've got some resources from the book, and not exactly on storytelling, but when I was looking through things for my marketing 101 area, I did end up picking a couple books, and one of them is called Just You, Authenticity, Leadership, and Your Personal Brand by Lisa King. And it goes deep into like analyzing and understanding what our motivations are and how we're perceived by others. So similar to what Kate was just talking about. And there is a companion workbook. So I have a feeling that you could end up with a very similar toolkit out of that.
That's amazing. And thank you, Melanie. I kind of posted we'll grow our strengths. We all have development opportunities, but grow what you're strong at. And sometimes you don't even see it, right? So when you have conversations like friends that you've been friends with since high school with Alana, they hold up a mirror for you. Sometimes it causes tears, right? Because it's how other people are seeing you that sometimes you don't even see yourself. And so that's, I think, really helpful.
Yeah.
Really great advice for everybody. And you can change, you can have design thinking, right? So you're going to sit and, for a couple days, how do I feel as a director of marketing, right? I've been sort of design thinking, well, what's it like to be a COO, and asking around and kind of figuring out what that's like. So you can try things on and evolve over time as well.
Yeah. What's the design thinking one for your career? It's called like
design thinking
for your career. Yeah. Anyway, we'll have to post it later. But there is one that's like specifically for this that people always rush out and buy. Okay, so you were recently, speaking of sort of, I guess, design thinking over the course of your career, you were recently promoted to director. And I'm curious now, looking back, what do you think was critical to making that leap?
So I was really struck when my father was laid off, and I think I was home at the time, so it was, early 90s or so. And this idea that I did good work, I worked hard, why didn't they see that? And that to me was formidable in the sense that people don't see. You could be nose to the grindstone, working hard, churning stuff out, but if you cannot clearly communicate, and as often as possible, I am a big believer in selfless self, publication. Tell people what you're good at. Tell people what your team is good at. I try to do during mid years is to send, this person did a great job for me to their manager. And I do this for as many people as I possibly can, right? So tell the story about it. Also reflects on you as a leader and that you're sort of appreciating a team person, right? So I don't know. I'm all about tell people as much as you can the great work that you've done, and in terms of a result, right? So there's like the star thing, which is what's the situation, what was the task, what was the action, and what was the result you achieved. Um, Tell people about you, tell people about your team, tell people about other team members that are doing good work, and keep that going over and over again. And then in terms of project management, there's monitoring and control, right? Are you doing things, and are you reporting on a regular basis, the good, the bad, the ugly? Do you
Yeah.
have those open lines of communication?
Yeah, it sounds like one of the things that you either naturally did or figured out over time was sort of a balance to it. Because I think women are worried that if they go out and they just talk about themselves, they'll face penalties, they'll be braggy, and that it can be, this is studied that women can be perceived more braggy for doing like the exact same self promotion that men do. So it isn't completely made up. And it sounds like you very naturally, over time anyway, have figured out how to be results oriented and convey your message at the same time as representing the we through your team and others. Other tools that you found that have helped you navigate that?
I mean, think about what I was writing right out of school, right? Quarterly investor reports on, orange juice, right? So there's this kind of sense on regular reporting, check in. How are you doing? How are you doing? How are we doing? We are taking great care of your investment with us. And so the other piece around it, and I've lost my train of thought there, was if you don't have that voice, right? So when the Obama administration came in and he brought in a very gender diverse team, they found that they were being overlooked, overspoken, not having a seat at the table. And so one of the tools that they used was amplification. And I think that's something as you're kind of learning your voice, right? And very easily you can just do a retweet. You don't have to say anything necessarily, right? But amplifying others' voices that resonate with you. And then over time, you kind of start to develop your language about how you want to talk about things, how you want to present yourself. But I think it's always helpful to raise other people's voices, to raise voices that aren't as loud as yours, that raise voices that aren't heard. You can use your voice to raise up others.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, no, that's an interesting win-win. I don't think we always think of that by amplifying others. It's also an element of our story, our brand, what we stand for, what we want to be known for, what we're good at. And so by that very virtue of helping others, we help ourselves. It's a nice win-win. And so if people have questions, keep putting them in. I'm going to ask one more and then see where we are. So I know your identity as LGBTQ plus has been a running theme, not obviously just in your career, but your life. And you shared beautiful insights and thoughts about navigating that identity in the book across different jobs and awkwardness. So now that you've been helping others, what have you seen has been critical for yourself or your others on those journeys?
I think one of the things that you sort of learn is that everything can be taken away at any time. So up until last year, there was no federal protection on losing your job because you're LGBTQ. There was a Supreme Court decision just last year. So prior to last year, anyone could lose their job because LGBTQ, and it was totally fine, right? We didn't have marriage rights for the longest time. The first time I got married, I was married in Maryland, but I worked in Virginia. So taking the train down, not married in DC, not married in Virginia, take the train back, married in Maryland, like recognized, right? And you also learn that you lose friends, you lose families, you lose people in your life, you lose job opportunities. So this sort of sense of like, you can't take things for granted really cemented in me. One, you got to build your own family. And that's sort of a key message for the LGBT community is you build your own family because your family leaves you, right? My mother still has a hard time with this. My dad was amazing, but to this day, right, and it's like 20 plus years later, she still struggles with this, and this is her struggle, right? And so I value all my relationships, and maybe that's something kind of intrinsic to me is I'm still friends with my first friend that I made as a 1-year old, through my friends in high school, through my nerd camp friends, through Wellesley, through everyone I meet. I'm sure there's friends on this chat that I'm going to be friends with when they, we find each other on LinkedIn and we join our Lean In Circle, right? I cherish all those friendships. I send holiday cards. I have a big Chinese New Year celebration each year, which is like my wedding banquet every year. So I have rituals, and I really cherish those relationships because they aren't guaranteed.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. One of the most powerful exercises, and I just like you it was back when you would go to a room for a training, and it was LGBTQ focused more on sort of trans and non-binary identities and things like that, and they gave you a piece of paper and they assigned you to a group, and they basically said, okay, blue people just lost their job, yellow people just lost their family. And you were just ripping away your piece of paper until you were kind of left with tatters. And it was this very visual symbol of what this process can be, and very powerful as a lot of these things, I think it's hard to totally put yourself in other people's shoes. Very powerful way to do that. Um, and I'm so glad that you were willing to share that, but also that you've stepped up for others. I remember you telling a story about, because you'd hung a rainbow flag in your office, interns came to you and said, now I feel, I feel like I could work here. I feel like I belong. Have there been other things, whether it was you or that allies did, that you felt like really helped make a difference along the way, or like you noticed really helped with that belonging or that support for others?
Absolutely. We all stand on the shoulders of giants. We all stand and are here because people fought for us, whether they know it or not. Having to really face the rise in anti-Asian violence has, I am a passionate ally to so many people, and very, very few times in my life do I even look at, because of the LGBT thing, I'm always like, that's the thing that kind of is the most risky for me, right? And then with this rise of anti-Asian violence, I've had to go back and, luckily because of Wellesley, I have a degree in Chinese history. This history is not erased to me. I'm fully aware, right, that Chinese have been here since the 1880s. I'm fully aware that we have laws against, specifically about our race, cannot come to the US, cannot go to school. And so it's had me really confront what's out there. And I lost track of your question. I knew I was getting around to it. We're
I
getting
think,
there. But what's been helpful?
the
Okay.
TLDR is because, I think we all, sit here, whether it's for Black people, for Asian people, for LGBTQ plus community, for essentially anyone who's being othered, and it may be for ourselves certainly, but I think just like what are the things that we can do to support, I think are so powerful to share. Yeah.
Sure. Yes. Okay. So focused on that. I always think of Mr. Rogers and to say to look towards the helpers. I was very fortunate, when I came out, Melissa Etheridge and Ellen DeGeneres had come out too, right? There were people out there using their voices to help others. When I got to Prudential, the chief financial officer was an amazing lesbian, and I'm having a talk with her on Wednesday. Like I hold on to these amazing inspirational people in my life. The CIO at Prudential transitioned during their tenure, and I got to present their story at NYU at an event. So look to the helpers, look to see who has a voice, look to see what you can do and learn about it. And it's messy work, right? I've been doing DEI for multiple decades. What language do we use? What do we say? How do we say it? And it evolves, right? So it's going to be messy. And I think if you come to it with a feeling about curiosity and wanting to help and wanting to be a part of that change, it's okay, right? It's okay to say, like even at the Oscars, right? You can't even be bothered to pronounce her name properly. There's just how can we come together and even do things like that? So I had a team member, I would call their voicemail at night and just hear them say their name over and over again, because I am terrible with names, and just really be very focused on saying their names because they were given a nickname when they joined the organization. And I'm like, you don't even call yourself that. Why do other people call you that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is it can be so small. It can be as small as learning someone's name. I just saw, I want to say on Twitter, some anecdote about a person calling out that they'd never really learned the intern's name in the organization, and reaching out and saying like, we're mispronouncing it the entire time, right? And the person being like, yeah, it was fine, whatever, and being like, no, you should be able to be called your name. And we should get this right. It could be as small as that, to support someone's identity. And I think that's a really great reminder. Okay, we do have a question up here about sponsorship. Amy, can you talk about any sponsor that you've made any sponsor you may have had who made a difference in your career? And how do we go about identifying sponsors and asking without feeling you're imposing on others? There is kind of a piggyback on the difference between mentors and sponsors. I'm happy, you go, and then I'll
the
add.
Questions about your story about the gym. Do you want to talk about that?
Hold on, something's knocking at my door. So why don't you start and then I'll follow with the gym.
So sometimes you don't know who's sponsoring or advocating for you, right? That's also very interesting. And then also comes back to the marketing piece of get that positive story out about yourself. And it may be sneaky how I do this, but people who are interesting to me, I'm deeply interested by people. I'm interested by their stories. I reach out and I ask people, right? So of late, I'm interested in COOs, right? So I reach out to female CEOs in my organization, and I'm like, tell me about your career. Tell me about how you got there. Tell me what's going on with that. And also, I also think about, well, who's in the room when decisions are made? Who's in the room when promotions are made? Who's in the room when we talk about ratings and calibrations and, merit increases, right? How many of those people can I sort of share my story with and build a relationship with, and I reach out and just, hey, I'm really interested in learning about you. And sometimes it stops there, right? Sometimes it's like dating. Sometimes there's no chemistry there and you're just like, oh, this is awkward and strange. And, thank you so much for your time and sharing your story. And I always follow up with a thank you note. Sometimes it's a 6-month engagement, like give me a data dump, tell me everything. And sometimes it's for life, right? The CFO at Prudential and I are talking tomorrow, and I've known this person for 20 plus years. I am here at Marsh McLennan because the very first friend I made at Prudential called me up 18 years later and says, there's a job at Marsh McLennan for you. All of my roles the past 5 roles have been because people know me, people know my work, and want me to join their teams, right? So the sponsors you may not know, sometimes there's people out there shining stars that are shining a path for you. And some of those relationships, I love org charts. I love seeing where people are. And I don't have a hesitancy to reach out and say, I'm interested in learning more about your story. And then can you convert them into a sponsor or an advocate? Are they in those conversations? Are they in a department that you're interested in joining? Is there a type of role that you're interested in? Tell me more about this. Now, as someone who's asking for this, right, you set the time up, you set the agenda, you come prepared. I do an extensive review of who this person is, like on the internet and Google and LinkedIn. I know as much as I can about them so I don't waste their time. So there's homework to be done and there's follow up, and you sort of treat it like any relationship that you want to support.
Yep. Yeah, no, that was really great and comprehensive. And I want to have time for Samantha's question. So I won't tell my story. Y'all can read the book.
Can we put a link to the book? Do people know about the book?
Yeah, we can put, actually, I'll just, because really fast, it's easier to type this. Go ahead to alanakaren.com or adventuresofwomenintech.com. They basically both take you to the same place. And you can learn more about my book. And yeah, and I go through the story of the sponsors and difference between mentors and sponsors and all that jazz there. Okay, so let's go click over. Amy, how did you stitch together your roles in different industries into a coherent story? That's from Samantha.
Samantha, hi. So I think of it as your toolbox of skills, what industries you've worked in, and what roles you've played, right? And then those things you can kind of mix and match. A resume is spin. And so what you say, you make the narrative. This is your narrative, right? And a lot of times it's very helpful to have a job description that you kind of want to, job description says can bake really good sourdough baguettes. And then your resume talks about how you're an amazing baker of sourdough baguettes. So it's sort of a conversation. Like I always think of each resume, each job description as a conversation that I'm having back and forth with somebody. And so, had I gone someplace else, right, I would be picking different bits and pieces of my life to sew this together. This happens to just fit really well, right? That I went from Prudential, which is life insurance, and property casualty, to alternative markets, to project managing funds of hedge funds, to federal IT project management, right? The project management piece that pivots, working at NIH, Department of State. And then Marsh McLennan has insurance, right? And a lot of the insurance folks are surprised that I have these licenses or had these licenses. And I worked in finance and I worked on Wall Street, and bringing in the technology work that I had done at the federal government. So it all just pieces together based on, what you've done. This is your narrative, right? This is your publication kit.
Yeah.
Your bio.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think it takes thinking a lot about certainly like what you've done and how you've done it so that it can apply to other jobs, but also what you want. I find when I talk with women that there tends to be a really strong slant on what's expected or what would be good for others or what would be good for the group or what would be good for their family or what their parents told them or whatever it is. And I do think there's an interesting journey as you go through this of figuring out what is the spark for you and where is your motivation.
Yeah.
Which I feel like you've done a great job with
and
as
hopefully
well.
As we get older, we are less inclined to follow BS. Right.
Well,
and
that
we have
is
a better
what I
sense
found.
of, right.
Yeah.
We have a better
Yeah, a
sense
lot of
of
stories
what
in 20s,
flow is.
30s were like that. Yeah. 20s, 30s were like that. And then by the 40s, 50s, everyone was like, nope, I want what I want. But I'd love to move that earlier in people's careers if we could.
that requires being completely truthful to yourself. And I think that, you know, it took me 15 years to come back around to Wellesley. It takes time to unlearn, right? Because we are born as an entity, and things get shoved on us and we learn different things. And freedom is unlearning and really figuring out who we are and being true to ourselves. I just found out last year, my Wellesley colleague is a psychiatrist, and she says, you are a social introvert. And I was like, my mind was blown, right? Because my whole life I'm like super extrovert, super extrovert. And I'm like, oh, that is really interesting, because I love these conversations. I love these one-on-ones. That's why I seek out people and have these one-on-ones and these coffee chats and these informational interviews, because I love this sort of personal connection. And then anything super big, conferences, I need to prep for it. And I need a lot of downtime after to recover. And so knowing these things, and some of these things you just find out like last year.
Totally. Yeah. 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 No, I think it's funny because we definitely, I think sometimes I have the completely wrong definition for example, of introversion, extroversion. Well, we are at time, but Zara had this last question we could probably do before we close. Amy had been talking earlier, Zara, about how it took her a while to go to the Wellesley reunions and I said, and I may be frozen because am I frozen?
There we go. You're back now.
I was thanking Amy. I was waxing like poetic about her. Anyway, you all missed it, but thank you so much for being my second ever guest on this and going through this.
Thank you so much for having me.
A bit of a guinea pig. Thank you so much.
I loved every second, and I can't wait to hear from everybody that joined us.
Yeah, thank you both for being here. This was such a great discussion. Got into some really just good topics, and just thank you for sharing with all of us. Thank you everybody for coming and pulling hopefully from some of the wisdom of these two amazing women. So thanks, ladies, and thank you everybody.
Thank you.